So we finally come to Kant's text itself, to the preface of the first edition, also known as the A Preface. Because once again, A is the letter used to refer to the first edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, and the B edition is the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason. So the preface starts with a passage, a longish passage that I'm just going to read out entirely because I think it is so important in order to understand the kind of project that Kant is going to be engaged in. So let's go. Human reason has the peculiar fate in one species of its cognitions that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, since they are given to it as problems by the nature of a reason itself, but which it also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. That's the first part of the quote, and I'm going to comment on it before reading on. So what Kant is telling us here is that reason itself, so this doesn't come from some external thing, right? This doesn't come from somewhere outside of us. It is reason itself that posits certain questions, that generates certain questions, that reason itself then cannot answer. So this is a peculiar situation, right? A peculiar fate, as Kant calls it. Reason itself, by its nature, gives us problems that it can't solve. And this is going to be key to understanding Kant's critique of metaphysics, his criticisms of existing metaphysics, which are going to consist in the claim that these are people who try to answer the questions that reason cannot answer, questions like whether there exists a God, whether the soul is immortal, whether the world is eternal. Those are questions that cannot be answered according to Kant. But it is reason itself and not some outside influence that we could simply ignore that makes us ask those questions. And so what we have to do is not just understand why reason can't answer them, but also we need to understand why reason generates them. Why we will always have this idea that we have to ask them. Only if we have both of those things, Kant thinks, we can take a successful position in metaphysics. We can ensure that we don't fall into illusions and mistakes. Okay, so let's read on. Reason falls into this perplexity through no fault of its own. And so it's kind of natural, even blameless, if we end up in perplexities. It, reason, begins from principles whose use is unavoidable in the course of experience and at the same time sufficiently warranted by it. With these principles it rises, as its nature also requires, ever higher, to more remote conditions. But since it becomes aware in this way that its business must always remain incomplete, because the questions never cease, reason sees itself necessitated to take refuge in principles that overstep all possible use in experience, and yet seem so unsuspicious that even ordinary common sense agrees with them. But it thereby falls into obscurity and contradictions, from which it can indeed surmise that it must somewhere be proceeding on the ground of hidden errors, but it cannot discover them, for the principles on which it is proceeding, since they surpass the bounds of all experience, no longer recognize any touchstone of experience. The battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics. Okay, so what is going on? Well, as reason does its job, Kant is suggesting, as it does its thoroughly natural, appropriate job, it is going to find out that the questions never cease. And so here is one example of that, right? Suppose that there's some event, right? There's some event. Now, what reason requires us to do is it requires us to ask for the cause of that event, right? It requires us to expand our knowledge and find out what caused this event to happen. And so we get to some new event. Now, reason asks us to ask again, what is the cause of that event, right? What was the cause of the cause? and hopefully we can find that out too. But we recognize immediately that this is going to be a process without end, right? Every cause generates the question of a further cause, which will generate the question of yet another cause, and so on and so forth. And there is something unsatisfying about that, right? Here is reason which cannot do an infinite task, right? It cannot get into immediately this infinity of causes, if there is an infinity of causes. And reason wants to, get out of this unsatisfying situation by taking the questions maybe to a higher level, right? Reason is maybe going to ask whether there is a first cause or not, right? So it's going to ask a question not about any particular cause, but about the sequence of all causes. Is there a first cause, or is there no first cause? Which is, in a sense, the same as asking, is the world eternal, or is it not eternal? Or reason is going to ask maybe whether there is some transcendent cause, a divine cause of all the natural causes together. Right? Those are the questions that reason is driven into when it understands, as it must, the necessary incompleteness of any attempt that it makes to fulfill its task. So what I think, well, one of the things that is important about this is that this story is going to structure Kant's approach to metaphysics, especially in the second half of the critique. In the dialectic, we're going to see again and again how Kant explains the problems of metaphysics in this way. There is a legitimate aim of reason that in a sense cannot be fulfilled, and then reason makes a jump to another level. But in making that jump, it errs, because it jumps to a level that takes it beyond experience. And when we are taken beyond experience, according to Kant, that is where real knowledge becomes impossible. And what we instead get is, these different metaphysicians, all of them having different ideas, none of them being able to disprove the others because, hey, there is no knowledge possible here. And so we get the endless battles and controversies of metaphysics. So that's important. And I guess that the other important thing here, which I would like to emphasize, is that for Kant, the problem of metaphysics starts here when reason understands its own finitude, right? Its own being finite, its own not being an infinite reason without boundaries that can grasp the whole, that can fulfill its task. It is when reason finds out that it can never fulfill its task, that there will always be something outside of it that it hasn't yet grasped and understood. That moment when we try to transcend our finitude and get towards this higher level of understanding that would allow us to, in a sense, complete the task and get the full knowledge, that is where reason goes wrong. And at least on my reading of the critique, it is going to be essential to Kant's project that it has human finitude, right? The fact that we are finite knowers, that we are really not God, and that we can't even hope to approach being God, and that maybe we shouldn't even take God as our standard, right? We really have to take our own reason as the standard, as the core, as that which sets the problems and provides the answers. That is going to be a central element of Kant's entire project. And maybe in some ways the most fundamental and the most revolutionary element. But that's something that we'll get back to later. Okay, so this is really Kant's picture of why metaphysics is a mess. Right? This is Kant's overall claim about why metaphysics is a mess. And of course, he's going to have to do a lot of work in order to show us what's going on here, how this works, and how we can solve it. And that is something that Kant is going to do, especially in the second half of the critique. So the way that Kant sets up the story here suggests that it's the second half of the critique, the dialectic, that is going to be the really important part. Even though, as you may remember from our video on the table of contents, most commentators nowadays focus on the first half, on the analytic. We'll come back to that too. So one thing that Kant is now going to do is he's going to say that, the fact that in metaphysics we don't seem to be able to get real answers because we started out in the wrong way in the first place, right? We're not able to get any real answers, and this leads to indifferentism, right? People like going, metaphysics, whatever. But Kant says you can't be indifferent to these things. You can't be indifferent to them, maybe in part because they're so important to us. Is there a God? Are we immortal? I mean, those are pretty important questions. Are we free? Those are pretty important questions. But also because it lies in the nature of reason itself to come across these questions, right? As we have just, seen, but as Kant has just suggested to us. It lies in the nature of reason itself to get into these metaphysical questions. And, no attempt to just do without metaphysics is going to work, because we're always going to end up back in metaphysics. So, what we should do, Kant says, after, by the way, very interesting footnote in which Kant sort of characterizes his own age as a genuine age of criticism to which everything must submit. And then he says that religion and legislation, so the church and the state really, might think that they can't be criticized or they oughtn't be criticized. And Kant categorically rejects that, right? He tells us that in this way they excite a just suspicion against themselves and cannot lay claim to that unfeigned respect that reason grants only to that which has been able to withstand its free and public examination. And so there's a little political thing here, right, where Kant says, freedom of speech, critical thinking, that should apply even to matters of religion and politics. Okay, that's not going to play a very important role in the critique of pure reason, of course, because it's not about practical reason, it's not about ethics, it's not going to be very much about religion, although God will play a role. But there is this political background here to Kant's thinking. Okay, so what Kant tells us after the footnote is that what our problem in metaphysics demands is that reason should take on anew the most difficult of all its tasks, namely that of self-knowledge. And so this is what Kant is going to do, right? The critique is the attempt of reason to gain self-knowledge. It is reason trying to understand itself. That is a very peculiar undertaking. And what Kant is going to emphasize later on, when he comes, and this is page Avii, so Romans 16, he gives a pretty convoluted and not too clear story about certain possible misunderstandings of the deduction of the pure concepts of the understanding. A passage that actually, the Kant scholars themselves aren't even fully clear which passages Kant means exactly. But one thing that we can get from that, from what he says about the deduction of the pure concepts of the understanding, is that he is afraid that people might believe that some of the things he's doing are a bit psychological, right? They are about how the human mind sort of works from a psychological, empirical point of view. If we investigate human reason, what are we going to find? How does the human mind actually work? Yes, there is a sense in which Kant is really interested in how human reason works. That is the main question. And that is, of course, a question about what is human thinking, how does human thinking work, and so on and so forth. But I think it is very, very important to see here that Kant really doesn't think of this as in any way an empirical, psychological kind of investigation, right? Reason trying to get self-knowledge is itself a pure project, right? And pure, again, for Kant means non-empirical, right? It doesn't have anything to do with what we get from sensation. And that is going to be really important, right? The entire way that Kant conceives of this project is as something that is not a series of empirical investigations that might turn out to be true or false, where we have to sort of do some experiments, even if they're just mental, internal experiments. That's not the way that the critique is supposed to be going. There is, I think, a temptation to read certain ideas of Kant in a very psychological or psychologist way. So, for instance, at one point, Kant is going to claim that we can know because of ourselves, really, because of the way that the understanding works, we can know in advance that the world is going to have stable laws of nature, stable, universally true laws of nature that describe all the events that are going on in the world. And one of the criticisms made of that by Bertrand Russell in I think it's in the Problems of Philosophy, but I would have to look that up. He says, what Kant is here assuming is that human cognition will continue to work in the same way, right? That human cognition itself is stable. So Kant is making this psychological assumption about our thinking, and he is basing his entire metaphysical project on that. If that really is what Kant is saying, if he is saying, oh, look, I mean, there are these psychological laws, and these psychological laws are somehow relevant to our understanding of the natural world, and because the psychological laws are stable in time, how we think doesn't change, therefore things out there in the world won't change. If that were Kant's story, then he has completely betrayed his own intentions here in the preface. And indeed, I should say, his own intentions, which are to be not a psychological theory, but the pure self-insight of reason alone. And so either Kant betrays, when he talks about laws of nature, his own project, or Bertrand Russell has misunderstood Kant. Spoiler alert, it is the second. Anyway, back to the preface. So what Kant is going to do is he is going to set out on a project in which reason getting to self-understanding should solve the basic mistake of metaphysics. The basic mistake of metaphysics being that we don't realize why we get into trouble. That we follow the natural inclinations of reason, but those natural inclinations of reason drive reason beyond beyond the bounds of its applicability, right? Beyond where it can actually gain knowledge. And so it is reason self-understanding that will have to enable us to not get into that kind of trouble. How that is going to work, well, we still have, I don't know, 600-700 pages to find out.